with any of Lawn Fawn's interactive die sets? If you haven't, I'm going to be showing you today's card, which features the Lawn Fawn Magic Slider die set. This is the card that we're going to be creating today. It has a really cute fall theme to it and has a fun interactive element to it. This card features the Magic Slider, like I said, and the Magic Slider is all about revealing something on the inside of the slider itself. So when you pull the tab, it reveals the rest of your scene, sentiment, or other types of things that you want to reveal on the inside of the slider. This creates a really fun interactive element on your card and is also really fun to give to both kids and adults alike. So I'm going to show you the card and how I created it, as well as have an overview of the dies itself. So that way when you go to work with these, you'll be able to know which pieces go with what, because there are a lot of dies in this die set, and I think having a little bit of an overview will help you understand what each piece does. So let's get started and create this card and learn a little bit more about the Magic Slider dies. Okay, so I have the Magic Slider dies sitting here, and you can see there are quite a few dies in this set. If you've just gotten this set, you're going to want to trim the dies apart. I like using some flush cutters here, and they're really great for getting into those tiny nooks and crannies because the point of these are so small. I usually trim these out over a bowl or the trash can so that way all of those little ends that are part of the dies all get caught because you don't want any of them to fall on the floor. Now, like I said, there's a lot of dies in this die set, so I want to kind of touch on them quick before we get started on making the card because I think that's going to help you to follow along as we're working on this card. So the first die you see here, this is the outer area of your slider. This is going to be the housing for all of your slider mechanism pieces. You're going to be cutting a window with one of the little window shapes that are included in this die set. There are 3 of them to choose from: an oval, a rectangle, and a heart. I ended up using the rectangle on my card today, but there are a lot of ways you can use these frames to create really neat windows for your sliders. The next die is a little rectangle piece that's a little bit larger than our window frames. This piece is what you're going to cut your acetate from, and you can also use it to cut your scene piece that goes behind your window. So the piece that is going to have the element that you're revealing on the inside. So you can use this in 2 different ways. You also have the track of the slider, which allows the slider itself to move in and out of your slider really easily. I like to cut the track from the same color of cardstock that the slider housing is made from. This, of course, is the slider itself. This is what's going to go inside the track and inside of the slider housing. This is what reveals your scene on the inside. To decorate your slider, you have 3 different tabs. You can choose any of these to add to the top of the slider itself, and that just adds a little bit more decoration to your slider. Finally, there are some little embellishments that are included in the die set. These are totally optional to use, and I'm not going to be using them on my card today. So to get started, I cut out some cardstock from the slider housing, and I'm also going to cut the track. That little tab on the end of this die, that lets you know that that's the front of the slider. So I'm going to attach my window into the slider. Now bear in mind, this is not the slider housing I ended up using on my card. I ended up cutting the center out with the rectangle, and I used dark navy blue cardstock. But at the time I started this card, I originally thought I was going to use yellow. So I ran these through my die cutting machine, and I taped them in place so that way I made sure they didn't go anywhere and everything stayed lined up the way I had it originally. You're going to want to end up folding that piece, and I also ended up cutting a track from that same color of cardstock. But again, I used navy blue for my final card that you'll see later on. That little rectangle that I had showed you earlier, that's what you're going to cut your acetate from. You can use window plastic or packaging from Stamps and Dies. Any sort of clear plastic will work. So I cut that out, and so then afterwards I started working on coloring my stamped images. So the images that I'm coloring today are from Lawn Fawn's Happy Harvest stamp set. I'm creating a thank you card with a fall theme, and I thought these would be really fun to use on the card to create a really cute little scene. So I colored the straw with some yellow markers, and now I'm using some blue to create the coloring for his navy blue overalls. I'm using just a couple of colors on each of these images. I don't want to get too difficult with the shading because this card is going to take a little bit to put together. So I want to make sure that the shading is very simple and easy to recreate and doesn't take too long. So I used 2 different colors for the overalls. I used a lighter blue and a darker blue, and I'm adding some shading to those overalls. I started off with the lighter color and then added in some of the darker and then blend that back out with the lighter, and that helps create a nice smooth transition of color. For his shirt underneath of the overalls, I wanted to create a little bit of a plaid pattern on here. So I used my Copic markers and I kind of sketched out a plaid pattern and then I colored it in. Once I added in all the coloring, then I also brought in a black marker and went back over top of all those lines to make sure that it had a nice smooth finish. For the green, I used a G24 and also a G94 marker, and I colored in the band on his hat. I also used some lighter browns to color in his hat as well. If you're interested in any of the colors that I used for these images, I do have them listed over at the blog, so check the link down in the video description and you can head on over there to see what colors I ended up using. I added a third color for the hat simply because I wasn't happy with the amount of contrast in the hat itself, so I went in and added one more color, and that ended up creating a much more dimensional hat. The face of the scarecrow was one of my favorite pieces to color. I wanted to give him a little bit of blush down towards the bottom of his face, so I used a couple of fleshy pink colors and added a little bit of blush to the bottom area of his face. For the pumpkins, I colored them in with a yellow and also a slightly more darker orangey yellow. I added some shading to the pumpkins and I didn't bother blending that out because I wanted the texture that it left behind. The sunflowers I colored with a few different yellows. I covered a base coat of the yellow first in my lightest color. Then I brought in a slightly darker shade of yellow, colored in the center area, and then an even darker color of that same hue to add a little bit of shading to the center. To add some texture, I used some browns and also some of those darker yellows and added some stippling. This helps give the effect of a nice sunflower center and really looks cool. I also added a little bit of more darker shading with that brown along the very outside edges of the one side. That helped make the center of the sunflower look a little bit more dimensional. For the petals, I added a slightly bit darker yellow to the backmost petals, and then I added just a little bit of shading in the veins of the flowers. To finish up my images, I added some white dot detailing to the scarecrow and also to the sunflowers. I added some stippling to the sunflowers to add a little bit of highlighting. And for some extra highlighting on the pumpkins, I added just a few little lines and dots to help make the pumpkins have a shiny appearance. So once my coloring was finished, it's time to start putting all of our pieces together. So you're going to need the piece that you cut from the rectangle, your acetate sheet, and also your slider housing. I'm adding liquid glue around the edges of the acetate and I'm going to make sure I get all of the edges covered. Once I have all of the adhesive down, I'm going to lay this right over top on the inside of that shaker housing. So right now I have the shaker housing with the front side facing down and I place that on the inside. I also attached my scene and the track on the other side of the inside of the slider housing. Next, I'm bringing in the tabs and I'm going to stamp a little prompt from the Push Here stamp set from Lawn Fawn. These are really great stamps that are perfect for interactive cards because they have things like pull here, shake me, slide me, really fun stuff that helps the recipient know what to do with the card. I'm stamping the slide me sentiment onto my little tab that I've cut from some orange cardstock, and I'm adding some white embossing powder on top of that and heat setting the sentiment. Once I have heat set that sentiment, I'm taking the slider itself and I'm going to attach that tab right onto the top area. Now that my slider is completely ready, I can insert this into the slot that is created on the slider housing and fit that in place. Because my track was already adhered down, I'm just adding some liquid glue on top and sandwiching that slider in between the slider housing and the track. So now that I have my slider pretty much built, I'm pulled back the slider piece and I'm starting to add all of the different elements to finish off my scene. You can see that the scene on the inside of this slider has some really cute clouds and a nice blue background along with the sentiment. This again was cut with that rectangle that you also cut your acetate from. The sentiments are also from Lawn Fawn stamp sets and the clouds are from the Plain and Simple stamp set from Lawn Fawn. So I added all of my scene elements to the card and I also attached this onto a Nina Desert Storm card base. And you can see how fun that this slider was to create and how easy it is because of this Lawn Fawn Magic Slider die set. I hope that today's video has given you some inspiration on using the Magic Slider dies as well as some fun Lawn Fawn products. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below, or you can head on over to the blog to get more information on this card, including still pictures, products used, and also the Copic colors that I used to color in the images. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiration. Thanks for watching!